About a year ago, I collapsed in my office and had to be rushed to the ER. They ran a series of exhausting medical tests, and after what felt like forever, the doctors diagnosed me with a serious illness. It was a liver infection, treatable, but if left unchecked, it could have turned fatal. At the time, my wife, Grace, was out of town, attending her friend's wedding. I chose not to tell her over the phone. I didn't want to scare her when she was too far away to do anything about it. There was no point in making her worry when she couldn't change the situation. But when she came home and saw how pale and weak I looked, I had no choice but to tell her the truth. She was shocked, but her reaction wasn't what I expected. She wasn't cold, exactly, but instead of deep concern or sadness, she just seemed disappointed. I couldn't shake the feeling that she blamed me, like this was somehow my fault. Maybe she thought I hadn't taken good enough care of myself. Whatever it was, I didn't dwell on it. I needed to focus on getting better. The road to recovery wasn't easy. I had to juggle my job while making major lifestyle changes, adjusting my diet, keeping up with an exercise routine, and cutting out certain habits. It was overwhelming, and honestly, it started to affect my performance at work. But I kept pushing through, trying to keep everything balanced. Meanwhile, I started noticing that Grace was pulling away from me. At first, I thought she was just stressed, but over time, it became obvious that something had changed. She wasn't as close to me as she used to be. Whenever I tried to be intimate with her, she would brush it off, telling me I needed rest or that she was too tired. One night, I finally couldn't hold it in anymore. As we lay in bed, a noticeable distance between us, I turned to her. "Grace, is something wrong?" She hesitated. "What do you mean?" "You've been distant," I said carefully. "I know this whole thing has been stressful, but it feels like you're shutting me out." She sighed and rubbed her forehead. "Vince, I'm just overwhelmed. Your illness has been a lot to process." I studied her face, trying to understand what she wasn't saying. "I know it's been hard," I said gently, "but you don't push away the people you love when things get tough. And that's what it feels like you're doing." To distract myself from everything, I buried myself in work. I got so busy that I started slipping. I stopped following my diet, skipped my exercise routine, and some days, I even forgot to take my medicine. I knew I was neglecting my health, but I kept telling myself I'd get back on track soon. Of course, that kind of carelessness came with consequences. It didn't take long for it to catch up with me. One evening, after another long day at the office, I felt a sharp pain in my side. This time, it was worse than before, intense, dizzying, unbearable. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor, everything around me blurring, voices echoing in the background. When I came to, I was back in the hospital, hooked up to N4. But this time, Grace had seen everything. She was the one who called for help, the one who rode in the ambulance with me, the one sitting by my bedside now, looking pale and worried. "You scared me, Vince," she said softly, running a hand over my forehead. I tried to smile, but even that took too much effort. I didn't mean to. She shook her head. "You've been reckless. You're not taking care of yourself at all." I sighed, too drained to argue. She wasn't wrong, and the doctor backed her up. After running more tests, he made it clear that my condition had gotten worse. "You can't keep ignoring this," he said seriously. "Your body is struggling to heal. If you don't start taking this seriously, it's only going to get worse. I strongly recommend that you take medical leave and focus on your recovery." Grace immediately agreed. "He'll take the leave," she said before I could even process what the doctor was saying. I turned to her. "Grace." "No." She cut me off firmly. "No arguments. You almost died, Vince. You're not going back to work and pretending everything is fine." But the thing was, taking a leave wasn't an option. This wasn't just any job. It was a company started by my closest friend, someone I'd known since college. When he first launched it, he wanted me to join him, but I wasn't sure if the business would survive, so I played it safe and took a different job. Years later, after the company had become successful, he offered me a senior position with great pay, and I took it. Since then, I had treated the company like it was my own. I wasn't just another employee. I was in charge of an entire division. If I stepped away, I didn't know how things would hold up. So after a few days of rest, I got back to work. One day, while I was on a call with my doctor discussing my latest test results, my friend, the company's founder and CEO, walked into my office. I hadn't even realized he was nearby until he suddenly spoke, his voice sharp with frustration. "Vince, what the hell?" he demanded. You've been sick this whole time, and you didn't tell me? I sighed, rubbing my temples. It's not a big deal, man. I can manage. Not a big deal? He practically exploded. You've been overworking yourself, running yourself into the ground, and now I find out you have a serious illness? How long were you planning to keep this from me? I didn't have an answer. He had every right to be upset, but I had my reasons. Before I could say anything, he took a deep breath and sat down across from me, his tone softer now. Listen, he said, I'm not just your boss. I'm your friend. And as your friend, I'm telling you, take a sabbatical. Rest. Heal. I shook my head. I can't do that. Why the hell not? I hesitated before finally admitting the truth. Because I don't know if I'll ever be able to come back. I swallowed hard and forced myself to continue. My health is going downhill, and I have a bad feeling about it. I just want to work as much as I can while I still can. Secure my wife's future. Make sure she has enough if something happens to me. Saying it out loud made it feel even more real. My voice cracked, and I quickly looked away. I hadn't even talked to Grace about this yet. I didn't want to burden anyone with my fears, but deep down, I was terrified. My friend leaned forward, his expression serious. Vince, don't do this to yourself. You don't have to carry this alone. I have to. It's my responsibility. No, he said firmly. It's mine too. God forbid anything happens to you. But if it does, I swear to you, I'll make sure Grace is taken care of financially. You don't need to work yourself into an early grave for that. His words were a massive relief, but I still didn't want to put that weight on him. Before I could argue, he cut me off. I'm putting you on sabbatical. No pay cut. 6 months. You can work from home if you really want, but that's it. No arguments. I stared at him, speechless. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. Just take care of yourself, man. That night, I went home and told Grace I wouldn't be going to work the next day. Before I could explain, she frowned. Were you fired? She asked. I scoffed, giving her a sarcastic look. Yeah, Grace. I was fired because of my deteriorating health. I expected her to roll her eyes or scold me for joking. Instead, her first reaction was something that made my heart drop. Are you dying? She asked bluntly. I froze. How could she be so insensitive? But I forced myself to play along. Yes, I said flatly. She didn't even blink. How long? I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady. I don't know. The doctor said maybe 6 to 7 months, maybe sooner. I thought she'd break down, cry, show some emotion, anything. But instead, her response hit me like a slap to the face. How will I manage my finances? She asked, crossing her arms. You don't have enough savings to cover me. That's why I kept telling you to leave your friend's company and take that overseas job with better pay. If you had listened to me, we could have built enough wealth by now for me to have a decent life. I stared at her, struggling to process what I had just heard. She wasn't upset that I was dying. She was upset that I was dying without leaving enough money behind for her. For a moment, I wanted to reassure her. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't as broke as she thought, that the equity I owned in the company was worth over $1.1 million and would only grow as the business expanded. But something inside me held back. I needed to see what she would do next. The truth was, when the company hit its first major milestone, my friend had given me a significant share. He had been generous, recognizing how much I had invested in the business. But I had never discussed it much with Grace. Maybe, deep down, I knew she cared more about security than she did about me. And now, seeing her reaction, I realized I had been right all along. Since that night, our marriage had come to a standstill. Conversations were dry, purely transactional. She never asked about my health. She barely even acknowledged my presence. I would see her leaving in the morning and coming home late at night, usually eating out. And yet, she didn't even have a full-time job. She worked as a nail artist at a salon, but only during peak seasons. It was unsettling, but I tried to ignore it. I focused on my health instead. Then, last month, she dropped the final bomb. When are we getting divorced? She asked casually, like she was asking about dinner plans. My world crumbled. Divorce was the last thing I needed in my condition. I felt sick. Divorce? I echoed, barely above a whisper. She rolled her eyes. There's nothing to be shocked about, Vince. I have to move on. It's better if I start distancing myself from you now. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. Then, in a bitter attempt to mask my pain, I asked, So, have you already found my replacement? To my horror, she nodded. Yes. The air left my lungs. It's someone I've known for a while, she continued, completely unfazed. And now I've started seeing him as a potential partner. She paused before adding, I've been going on dates with him. I can't even explain what I felt in that moment. It was as if something inside me had been hollowed out, leaving nothing but a pit in my stomach. My marriage, everything I thought it stood for, felt like a complete sham. I kept replaying our conversation in my head, trying to make sense of it. But there was nothing to make sense of. Grace didn't love me. Maybe she never had. That night, I called my friend and told him everything. He was furious. Vince, you need to remove her from everything, he said firmly. All your legal documents, your will, whatever she's listed on, take her off. I hesitated for a moment, but I knew he was right. I already did, I admitted. I don't even want to call her my wife anymore. Let's just stick to Grace. He let out a relieved sigh. Good. She doesn't deserve a damn thing from you. Grace had no idea about the equity I held in the company. I had always planned to surprise her with it when I retired. By then, the money would have been enormous. But now, looking back, I was grateful I had kept it a secret. If she had known, she probably would have played her part a little longer, masked her true self just to stay for the money. The thought made me sick. As for my health, the truth was, I had been diagnosed with a serious liver infection. It wasn't terminal, at least, not yet, but if I didn't take care of myself, it could become fatal. The doctors were still hopeful that I could recover, but I had to strictly follow their advice. Medication, lifestyle changes, rest, everything. That night, when I first told Grace it was terminal, I had only meant it as a prank. I wanted to see her panic, to watch her break down in fear at the thought of losing me. But instead, that prank revealed the truth about her. And in return, she did this to me. At first, I tried ignoring Grace and focusing on my well-being. I committed myself fully to my recovery. I joined a fitness class, stuck to a strict diet, went on regular runs, and followed every single one of my doctor's instructions without fail. But despite my discipline, my body wasn't healing the way it should have. Something wasn't right. It didn't take long to figure out why. No matter how much I tried to take care of myself, every bit of progress was undone the moment I saw Grace. Watching her get ready for her dates, carefully applying her makeup, picking out outfits, humming to herself like she didn't have a care in the world, made my stomach churn. Some nights, she would stumble in late, reeking of alcohol, her lipstick smeared, barely acknowledging me. The few times we did speak, it was always about the divorce. How many extra days have you bought yourself with that miserable diet? She scoffed one evening, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. Her words were laced with cruelty, but I refused to react. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing how much it stung. But the truth was, it did. Every second under the same roof with her was draining me, setting back whatever progress I was making. It was like trying to heal while still standing in the fire that burned me in the first place. Before all of this, my life had been simple, maybe even uneventful. Work and family. And by family, I meant Grace. Now, with both slipping through my fingers, I had nothing left to hold on to. That's when my friend made a suggestion. Move into the rooftop apartment at the office, he offered. It's a small one-bedroom, but it's comfortable. We used to hang out there after work, remember? You'll be close to the team, and it'll help keep your mind off things. I didn't have to think twice. Staying at home was suffocating me. Moving out was the best decision I could make for myself. The day I packed my things, Grace barely looked up from her phone. But as I was heading for the door, she finally spoke. So, is this permanent? She asked, her tone indifferent. Until the divorce is finalized, I replied. She didn't ask anything else. She didn't call or check in after I left. The only time I heard from her was when the divorce papers reached her. She left a short, detached voicemail. Thanks for making this easy. I appreciate you letting me go without any trouble. That was it. No emotion. No regret. Just relief. The divorce itself was straightforward, almost too smooth. There was nothing to fight over. What Grace never knew was that the house we lived in wasn't even mine. It was on a 10-year lease, with only a year and a half left. When the topic of the house came up, I agreed to put her name on the lease. You can stay here for the remainder of the lease, rent-free, I told her. She nodded, completely unfazed. That's fair. She assumed I had nothing left, that whatever little I had was now being used to sustain myself. She believed my illness had drained me completely, physically and financially. And that's exactly what I wanted her to think. With that chapter closed, I focused on rebuilding. I stuck to my health routine, stayed consistent with my workouts, and even started joining in on important office calls just to pass the time. Little by little, I was regaining control of my life. Then came the news that changed everything. My latest test results showed real progress. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't let myself believe in before: hope. I had spent so long convinced my days were numbered, no matter how many pills I took or how much my doctor reassured me. But now, I felt different, stronger. The weight of everything, Grace, the betrayal, the divorce, was finally lifting off my shoulders. And for the first time in a long time, I could see a future worth looking forward to. The divorce was finalized soon after. I let Grace stay in the house until the lease expired. Once those 18 months were up, it wouldn't be my problem anymore. I stayed in the rooftop apartment for a while longer. It was small, but had everything I needed. Eventually, though, I felt ready to move forward. I kept only the essentials and sent the rest of my belongings to storage. When I returned to the house one last time to collect my things, I wasn't surprised by what I found. Grace's new boyfriend had already moved in. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even shocked. If anything, I found it slightly amusing. As I packed my belongings, he hesitantly walked over to me. "I'm really sorry to hear about your illness," he said, his tone awkward. I gave him a small smile. "Thanks." He shifted on his feet, clearly uncomfortable. "How much time do you have left?" I met his gaze and pretended to think. "Not sure. Maybe a few more months." He nodded solemnly, and I had to fight the urge to laugh. It was oddly satisfying watching the man Grace had thrown everything away for now stuck in her web. Maybe I had truly moved on. Or maybe, deep down, I just liked knowing I had dumped my freeloading wife on someone else. Health-wise, I was better than ever. I had thrown myself into work, taking on more projects and responsibilities. Living in the office had been an unexpected blessing. It allowed me to work at my own pace while keeping my mind occupied. But now that my health had stabilized, it was time to move forward. I planned to cash out a portion of my equity and finally rebuild my life. I had already started looking for a house. 5 months in the office building was long enough. Though my friend insisted I could stay as long as I wanted, I didn't want to overstay my welcome. He had already done more for me than I could ever repay. Then, in the midst of all of this, I received a text from an unknown number. "Hi, my name is Emily. I'm Brian's wife, your wife's new lover. I'd really appreciate it if we could meet." Curious, I agreed. When we met, she looked me up and down, eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't look like someone suffering from a terminal illness," she said. I smiled. "What else do you know about me? And why did you want to meet?" Emily's expression darkened. "My husband had an affair with Grace for more than 2 years. They kept it hidden from me. But after news of your illness spread and Grace got the house, he finally admitted it. He left me and moved in with her." I was taken aback. Grace knew the house was leased, not owned. So what was she playing at? It was clear now. Her act of finding another man because of my illness had been just that, an act. She had been cheating on me long before I ever got sick. Emily was devastated. According to her, Grace had lured Brian into the affair, but it wasn't just about love or passion. 2 years ago, Brian had inherited a sizable fortune from his father. That's when Grace latched onto him. "Brian's quite a bit older than us," Emily said, shaking her head. "He's in his late 50s. We have grown kids. I never thought he'd do something like this." I listened as she explained why she wanted my help. "I'm willing to take him back," she admitted, "if Grace leaves him alone." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that? He's been cheating on you for 2 years. She nodded without hesitation. "I don't want a broken family. We had plans to retire together. I can't imagine living alone at this stage of my life." I didn't judge her for it. It was her decision. Some might call her weak for wanting to go back to a man who betrayed her, but everyone has their own reasons. They weren't divorced yet, and if she believed she could salvage their marriage, that was her choice. When I told her the truth about my health, that I wasn't terminally ill, her face lit up with genuine happiness. "That's amazing news," she said, smiling. "Congratulations on your recovery." She asked me about my plans, and I told her I was looking for a place of my own. That's when I casually mentioned that the house Grace and Brian were living in wasn't owned. It was leased, with only 1.5 years left. Emily's eyes lit up. I could see the gears turning in her mind. She had just found another move to make in this game. She thanked me, shook my hand, and left. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Dozens of missed calls, unread messages, and voice notes from Grace flooded my screen. I played one of them. Why did you lie about your health? She hissed. Why didn't you tell me you were getting better? Another message followed. You cheated me by hiding the equity. Hearing the sheer desperation in her voice was almost comical. The way she practically choked on her own rage, it was priceless. She had played her game well, but now the tables had turned. Then she showed up at my office. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I saw her pacing back and forth, visibly anxious. Instead of rushing to meet her, I told the receptionist to make her wait. Hours passed. I know it sounds cruel, but I enjoyed watching her squirm. After all, I had spent months drowning in that same anxiety, that same desperation. I had watched her dress up for dates, stumble home drunk, pretend I didn't exist. Now, it was her turn to suffer, and I wasn't in any hurry to ease her pain. When I finally let her in, she stormed into my office, slamming the door behind her. How could you? She shrieked. Why did you lie about your health? Why didn't you tell me you were getting better? And the equity, why did you hide that from me? I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, taking in her fury. Every ounce of her rage came from a place of pure misery, and I savored it. I smirked. How long have you been cheating on me, Grace? Her face froze. Then, like clockwork, she tried to lie. It wasn't like that, she said quickly. It only happened after your illness. I gave her a knowing look. Try again, I said flatly. I know about Brian. 2 years, Grace. Not after my illness. 2. Damn. Years. Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. Caught. So what was I to you? I continued. A safety net? A bank account? Were you just biding your time? Her voice wavered. It was just casual, a friendship that meant nothing. I let out a dry laugh. Right. So the moment you thought I was dying, you suddenly decided to sleep with him. She squirmed in her seat. It wasn't like that. I leaned forward. Then what was it like, Grace? She broke. Tears streamed down her face as she pleaded with me to take her back. She confessed everything. She had stayed with me because she believed I had no substantial savings. And when she learned Brian had inherited a fortune, she set her sights on him. But there was a problem. Brian wasn't ready to leave his wife. He needed proof that Grace wasn't just after his money. So, to prove her loyalty, Grace promised him the house. If Brian left his wife and married her, she would give him everything. Her plan was to deceive him, too. But then Emily found me, and the truth came out at just the right time. I smiled, leaned back, and said, You should leave, Grace. Her face twisted in desperation. Please, she whispered. Let's talk. Let's at least have dinner together. I scoffed. Dinner? Seriously? You think we can just sit across from each other, have a nice meal, and pretend you didn't betray me for years? She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Vince, now that everything is sorted, we can get back together. Restart our lives. I don't have any complaints about you anymore. I laughed. A real, deep laugh. The audacity. The sheer delusion. You don't have complaints about me? I repeated. Oh wow, that's a relief. I was so worried. Her tears kept falling, but this time, I felt nothing. Those same tears had once manipulated me. But she had forgotten one thing. I wasn't her husband anymore. I owed her nothing. Grace, I said coldly, leave. She shook her head. Please, Vince. I sighed. If you don't walk out that door in the next 10 seconds, I'm calling security. Her lips trembled as she looked at me, waiting for me to break. But I didn't. She wasn't my problem anymore. And let me tell you, there's no feeling more satisfying than watching the defeated face of someone who betrayed you. A week later, my latest test results came in. My doctor confirmed that I had fully healed. It was surreal. After everything, the months of pain, the exhaustion, the weight loss, I was finally free. I had lost almost 25 pounds since my diagnosis, but it wasn't just the illness, it was my lifestyle. I had spent years buried in work, making money, sacrificing my own well-being, all for my so-called family. Well, for Grace. And for what? Nothing. The moment she thought I was dying, she left. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just divorce papers and a clean break. After my conversation with Brian's wife, she wasted no time confronting her husband. She laid it all out. The manipulation, the lies, how Grace had never truly cared about him and had only let him move in as a way to secure her future. Up until that moment, Brian had convinced himself that Grace loved him. He had been defending her, believing in the fantasy she had spun. But when he found out the house was leased and that Grace would soon be completely dependent on him, everything changed. Grace had woven an elaborate web of deception to keep him hooked. She made him believe she was offering him security, a fresh start, a new life. But the moment he realized she had nothing, no house, no money, just an arsenal of well-crafted lies, his illusion of her shattered. Emily, determined to protect the inheritance meant for her children, made sure Grace was thrown out of Brian's life for good. I don't know what happened between them after that, nor do I care. For a while, Emily kept in touch, updating me about their situation. But eventually, we lost contact. I had asked her once or twice how she could ever forgive her husband for what he did, but she was reluctant to answer. I didn't push. That was her battle, not mine. Grace, on the other hand, refused to accept defeat. She tried everything: calls, emails, texts, even sending gifts to my office. When it became too much, I blocked her on every platform. But when she found out I was getting my own place, her desperation kicked into overdrive. She showed up at my office, playing sweet, pretending like we could just go back to the way things were. I ignored her, but she was relentless. The truth was, she had no job. The lease on the house was set to expire in a few months. She was running out of options. Then, I learned something interesting. One of my old neighbors mentioned that Grace had been renting out a room in the house to a bachelor for over a year. That rent was covering her other expenses. I don't know how else she's been surviving. Maybe she's relying on favors from other men. Maybe she's just scraping by with whatever she has left. Either way, it's no longer my problem. For the first time in a long time, I truly believe that everything happens for a reason, a good reason. If Grace hadn't shown her true colors, I would have still been stuck in that toxic marriage, wasting my life on someone who never truly cared about me. Instead, I got my health back. And more importantly, I got my life back. Now, I have my own place, a cozy 2-bedroom penthouse. It's exactly how I wanted it. Every corner, every detail reflects my taste. No compromises. No adjusting for someone else's preferences. Just my space. My sanctuary. And I couldn't be happier. A lot of people, friends, family, even some of you, have suggested that I start dating again. Some of my younger colleagues at the office won't stop pushing me to get back out there. You're in your prime, Vince, one of them, Kevin, said the other day. Women love a man with a story. And dude, you've got a hell of a story. I just laughed, shaking my head. Yeah, but I'm not sure I'm ready for all that again. Come on, at least try. Another colleague, Lisa, chimed in. There are apps now, you know. There's this one for people over 45 who are starting over. It's like a version 2.0 of life. I hesitated but eventually installed it, mostly out of curiosity. But the truth is, I'm still not sure about this whole modern dating scene. Everything is different now. Apps, swiping, talking to strangers online. It's a world I don't fully understand. And to be honest, I'm not sure I even want to. People have also warned me about the dangers of online dating, the scammers, the women who prey on men who are emotionally or financially vulnerable. That's the last thing I need. I've been burned once, and I have no intention of letting it happen again. I sighed, staring at the app icon on my phone, my finger hovering over it for a moment before I pulled away. Just don't want to get into any new mess, I muttered to myself, locking the screen. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you soon.